All right, welcome everyone. Welcome COSEM family. Welcome COSEM guests. Welcome to this wonderful, powerful, equity-based conversation series today where we have special guest Barnaby Spring. I want to be sure to read a little bit about Barnaby before we go into our mindful centering to get into the good talk. And so, for those of you who don't know, Barnaby Spring is amazing. He's an educator, an actor, a writer, an artist, an activist, and longtime meditation and yoga practitioner, living in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York City, with his wife and son. Barnaby is deeply committed to the ways in which mindfulness can be an ally in dismantling systemic racism within himself, others, and in our society. He seeks to become a good ancestor. As a citywide student services director in the New York City Department of Education, Barnaby leads the work of cultivating mindfulness and yoga programs throughout New York City Department of Ed and serves in workflows on counseling supports, students in temporary housing, and New York DOE's most vulnerable students. Huge responsibility, huge undertaking by this man who was an activist, actor, writer, educator. When it comes to discussions on equity in our culture, it is Barnaby's request that rather than be associated with or representative of any of the above in those titles, that he be invited to participate in this dialogue as a self-identified white male of privilege and entitlement who has benefited greatly and disproportionately from the white supremacist culture that he lives in as a citizen that we call the United States of America, and as a white male in this country. He speaks for himself, no other individual, organization, or institution, drawing from his own direct experience is the voice that comes through from Barnaby Spring. I met this man at COSEM's Educating Mindfully Summit and our national conference, and it was just such a joy. And he's made me wait over a year to bring him into this conversation. So we're thrilled to have him. We're just going to pause for a minute and take our mindful moments of just being in this space and anchoring in this space together. So let's just take that pause and take those deep breaths. Taking a moment to notice the emotion that's bubbling inside of you in this moment. What are you experiencing? Just giving it a name, naming that emotion. And acknowledging that all emotions are welcome in this space. Acknowledging that this is a space of inclusion, not only of people, but inclusive ideas. Acknowledging that this is a space to grow and shift humanity into one that is connected, whole, and healed. Acknowledging that this is a space that we are cultivating so that our children no longer need an experience that they need to heal from. And may we all become good ancestors. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Without further ado, we absolutely want to jump on in to hearing from Barnaby. I also need to get in the shameless plug that he is one of the authors of our Educating Mindfully book. He's one of the 40 of us that contributed to this 355-page field guide. In fact, Barnaby's even the one that named it a field guide of best practices because it really is around stories of school transformation through mindfulness. So we are absolutely thrilled, Barnaby, that you're here with us. We ask all of our guests this one question first. It's what gets us going. What is your personal mindfulness practice like? What does that look like? Let us in a bit. I always love to share how mindfulness is personal and that we make it individualized to suit our needs. So we learn from each other when we hear how people do what they do in this thing we call mindfulness. So if you could just share with us a bit about your own practice, we'd love to learn.
Well, thanks, Tovi, and hello to friends who are on the screen here, and also to our Facebook friends who will be seeing this, and also thank you to Tovi and to Tracy, and to the brothers and sisters I see from the work in the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully, who are just popping up here on the Zoom. Um, I have a path that's informal and formal. And I think even by talking about this, I'd like to encourage folks to think about this. Is mindfulness something that we learn to do, or it is something that we begin to notice and appreciate that we always have been doing it? And so the informal practices of mindfulness and meditation were just there in my childhood. Whenever I was sitting still or silent or paying attention in any kind of a situation. Um, you know, my 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 sister was a child of the 60s, and I always wanted her to play games with me when I was a kid when we lived in Arizona, because my parents were not around a lot. And when they were, it was extremely violent. Our home instantly became the most dangerous place on the planet. Um, but my sister was a very talented artist, and a hippie, And I used to ask her. I always wanted her to play these games with me: Scrabble, Candyland, or Monopoly. And she would finally just say, "Barnaby, go meditate, contemplate," And I'd say, "What is that?" And bugging her, and she would show me how to sit. And so I there was that. But then there were informal things. For instance, when I would be paying attention to nature, just in the yard. We had irrigation, and when the irrigation came into the yard, different kinds of creatures would be on the side and the sidewalk. And this sense of silence and stillness and simply breathing and noticing and appreciating. I had very toxic, violent males in my life. I had a stepfather who, when he walked in the house, I would hide in the closet in my room and stay there for like 1, 2, 3 hours. And I would sit there breathing, still, silent, and eventually uh, be calm and feel safe. Once I was lost in a canyon as a kid, Oak Creek Canyon outside of Sedona, Arizona, and cried my guts out because I knew I was going to be in trouble with my mom, not because I was lost, but because I knew when my mom found me, she was going to, be upset. But once I got through crying, I noticed the beautiful sound of the water, the color of the rocks. So there was that informal practice. And then it developed. Um, Ellen Langer of Harvard University says mindfulness is about noticing and appreciating, mindfulness without meditation. And I'm not Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I was baptized Catholic as a kid. But so when I went to Father Flanagan's Boys Town and lived in institutionalized youth care for 8 years, there were these incredible songs that we would sing, the music of the Catholic Church, the Latin masses, and those were intense meditations. And we were taught these prayers, and prayers were a form of mindfulness. But it didn't become formal for me until I was in a yoga class with Cindy Lee, the founder of Om Yoga. and she was teaching me yoga, and I was dealing with yoga. It was not an easy experience for me, yoga. She once asked me, what is it like for you, Barnaby? And I said, it's like ground glass seeping through every pore in my body. That's what it's like. And she would laugh, and then I started to enjoy it and come back for more classes. And she said, Barnaby, the reason a lot of people practiced yoga was to increase their mindfulness practice so that they could meditate or practice mindfulness. And I was like, oh no, what does that mean? And she introduced me to her partner at the time, David Nichtern, who wrote the song Midnight at the Oasis. I don't know if any of you know that, but David Nichtern was a senior meditation and instructor in the Shambhala organization. And David taught me a very simple form of meditation. And then, of course, I was off. I was deep into study and deep into researching. And this was sort of in the 80s and the 90s, looking at Zen, looking at Tibetan Buddhism, looking at then John Kabat-Zinn came along with mindfulness, paying attention on purpose in a particular way. And so my meditation, my mindfulness practice today is a very deep integrated practice that, at this point, I'm really taking a look at what it means to decolonize mindfulness. I feel in some ways I'm coming full circle into who really, what did we call it? What did we call it before we gave it these labels? Because this is a very human, universal thing. This stillness, silence, breathing. This is nothing new, and yet it's so old and simple, and we're so automatized and wrapped in automaticity that it feels as if we're discovering for the first time in our lives. So my formal practice is a daily practice. It's a moment to moment practice. It's full of retreats, presentations, and also just studying both meditation and mindfulness. So that's my answer. That's what my practice is like today.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Barnaby. Thank you for just showing up so authentically too in the response, because the decolonization of something so ancient is absolutely critical to continuing to bring it to the masses, because so many people one feel like it's new, or we feel like this is something that really privileged white women have time to do, that only they get to do it. And in so many circles, that's how it gets cultivated, even and messaged in so many of the images that we see. And so, acknowledging the universal roots of sitting still and breathing is just absolutely powerful, and definitely leads to the decolonization itself of the practice. What else comes to mind for you when you think about decolonizing mindfulness and bringing the equity and inclusion piece to it? What is
It's
that?
funny,
What, say more.
when I was listening to you, Tovi, a big part of how this works is mindfulness isn't just me talking about mindfulness, but paying attention and listening deeply and seeing deeply when others are talking about it. And so as you were talking about it, I was paying attention to what you said and noticing what rose up in me. And here's how that work came into the picture. There was a man who this whole world watched die in front of our faces, saying, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And we watched him die. Police officer was pressing his knee to his neck, and the man died in front of our eyes. He happened to be black, but it's funny. He didn't just happen to be black. The the root cause for me, when it comes to inclusion and equity and accessibility, is racism. And that's what it is. And that's what it is. And that's what it became for me in that moment. And when it becomes something else, I'll let you know. But right now, my purpose of practicing mindfulness is to engage in the process of leaning into realizing a world where all human beings know, understand, and can skillfully live as equal human beings, which includes equity, but is not exclusive to equity.
Absolutely. What you're naming makes me think around what shifted in you as a white man. Did you feel like you harbored any racism, carried any racism in your lifetime, and how has that evolved to unravel itself in you? The word that's coming to mind is
Right.
unvolved, but that's not even a word until now.
Well,
So,
I'll tell you, there's a dear friend of mine who died a few years ago from cancer, Dr. Benjamin Barber, who wrote, folks should take a look at him because he wrote a book called Jihad versus McWorld. He wrote a book called Towards an Aristocracy of Everyone. He created the interdependence movement after 9/11. And he wrote a book, If Mayors Ruled the World, and he was created the global parliament of mayors. And he was a very mindful political theorist and educator, and he was arguing that we needed to devolve as a species. Maybe we needed to get back to some things, was his argument in some ways. But it's funny that you should mention him. How it happened for me was really being in the environment that my mother, who was very socially conscious, created for us as children, speaking to us about why Cesar Chavez was leading a strike and why we were not going to be eating grapes. An uncle that I had in our family who was a organizer, union organizer, Vern Partlow. He wrote the first anti-bomb song in this country, Old Man Adam, the Talking Atomic Blues. And growing up with kids from all walks of life, all races, all creeds at Boys Town, and knowing and having direct, valid experiences that race is a construct, and then living in Arizona and being a white male in Republican Arizona for 10 years and being a cowboy and almost being born into a kind of incultured racism, being hardwired for racism, not even knowing that, and then having to go through some cultural chemotherapeutic experiences where I got in I going to Cornell and meeting George or I forget his name, Foreman, not Foreman, who was one of the organizers of SNCC, Jim Foreman, having conversations, looking into my own Native American indigenous roots and heritage. Um, you know, Coming to a point, and then of course, this is really important, working in public education, working in urban public education, looking at how life goes in the world for black and brown youth of color or children who aren't part of the dominant culture, you know, our Asian American children, and in the country, not just in any one place. And then I have to say, it's been my personal experience that black women leaders have, have I've done my best work in all areas of my life. Now maybe this is my issue, but black women leadership, and it's an ongoing process of realization that this is what I needed to do. We live in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Crown Heights is an intense neighborhood and has an intense history. And I want to become a good ancestor, and I see this today. I'm going to be 60 on May 21st. I don't have a lot of time left, and this is all about the question of who am I being as opposed to who do I want to be, and becoming that person that I want to be before I say next.
Thank you for sharing that. And, what you're naming too around, I think, Black women and Black women in leadership is part of that whole movement too around, learning from Black women in this work.
Oh,
And what
yeah.
does that look like? Yeah,
You,
and how
learning
that
from
shows up.
you, learning from you, Tovi,
Yeah.
learning from Octavia Butler, woo, learning from Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategies, learning from, Angel Kyoto Williams, learning from people who've been marginalized. And it gets more intense because you get lonely out there if you decide that you want to do this work. You can't really stand with a lot of white males because a lot of white males ain't there for that. And you can be understood and accepted and championed and loved by the Black community, but you need to be aware of the fact that you still got it in you, and it'll come
Right.
up out of you in very unconscious, messy ways. This sense of entitlement, of privilege, right?
Absolutely. And part of what you're naming is interesting for me too because I'm seeing like this sense of permission by white dominant culture in that these Black women other marginalized groups have been here doing the work, have been in it, have been saying it, and now the voice is being found more valuable or acceptable. But at this, and not even a but, and at the same time, it's because it's been made so by white people who have said, okay, now we'll listen. Okay,
Right.
now's the time. Okay, now we'll make this okay. So we're still in, it's almost like rising up within the same oppressive system. Not
Exactly.
rising up to fight, but like, yeah. Are you following me?
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called Decolonizing Trauma. The whole nation's been traumatized. Now, all of a sudden, everybody wants to have trauma informed classrooms, as if trauma has just happened to the nation.
That's right.
We got children, in this nation who've been living in trauma for 400 years. My family was the most dangerous place, the most traumatic place. I saw blood pouring from people's bodies when they were beaten. I saw my mother tried to commit suicide. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
who is it happening to today that now all of a sudden it's an issue?
Precisely, precisely. And those are the things that are valuable that we're naming, I think, in this conversation as we continue to look at the cultural and institutional norms around
Mm,
equity and inclusion. Like,
yeah,
it's not just about people and small incidences and neighborhoods. This is part of a larger machine, if you
yeah,
will. And it's going to take people like you in naming what you're naming to really make the shift to make it so that it is decolonized, it's deinstitutionalized,
yeah,
and we are shifting the culture.
yeah,
And I know that you have some tools that you want to share with us around what you're
yeah,
working with around this.
yeah. So, just for starters, and forgive me, but the white male in our country is really on my mind these days. The white males that stormed the Capitol. I'm thinking a lot about those guys. Pete Seeger said it's easy to talk to people who agree with you, very difficult to talk with people who disagree with you. And there's a mindset. And just because Biden's the president doesn't mean the mindset has shifted. People are digging in and are going to be digging in. And it comes down back to root cause. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I know you want to call it all kinds of names, but I'm talking about racism. Okay. And I want to dismantle racism that exists between my ears, in my thinking, in my speaking, in how I behave. And I want to dismantle racist structures that support white supremacy.
Amen.
That's what I'm about. And so, what do? Well, the first thing I did, since I had a lot of black brothers that I grew up with at Boys Town, and I'm very comfortable, and I live in Crown Heights. We live in a very integrated building. I started speaking to a lot of my friends who just happened to be black, and I wanted to know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my closest friends saying, "We love you, Barnaby, but please, will you stop talking to us about this? We don't want to talk to you about it. We love you. We don't want to talk to you about it. We want you to go talk to some of your white friends about this, you know."
Mm-hmm.
And that struck me, you know. And and then I was like, well, where do I fit in? Where can I be of service? White males, and this is what's dangerous about this conversation today. It's a bit like a tightrope, Tovi, because I could center myself in the middle of this conversation. And that's what white males like to do too. White male in his shining armor, coming to do something about racism. Don't want to do that either. Got to get back, got to step back. Where do I go? And I think a lot of white folks in this country are ready to do the work, but they don't know where to go, what to do, how to do it. So the first thing is practice mindfulness. So I'm going to tell you some specific things that I did. One of the things that was important to me, especially after the horrific things we saw, the pandemic of inequity, the pandemic lifted the veil off of the inequity that exists between that shows the disproportionality in this country, and just being mindful of that, sitting with that, staying with it, having a practice that keeps you with the reality of the situation, as opposed to wanting to create a big lie or a big fantasy of a conspiracy, or to stay with reality no matter where it takes you. And
Mm-hmm.
that's with the breath and with paying attention and then reporting. So I'm going to share my screen shortly, but one of the things that I did was I found an organization. It's on Facebook. We'll share the link with you somehow. It's called White People, period, and then doing in capital letters something. And I joined that group. And that was the first thing I did. And these are white people who want to do something about dismantling structures of racism. It's not a mindfulness class. See, the point about mindfulness isn't that you keep on practicing mindfulness. The point about mindfulness is that you become aware and
Right.
you develop curiosity, you develop courage, you develop an intimate curiosity. You want to pay attention. So you go out and do things.
Mm-hmm.
So I joined this group, and it's run by Asia um, and Molly, and you'll find their last names. Go check it out. Um, and they're white people who want to do things, who are coached by people of color, who are coached by black people, and who are informed. But we want to do the heavy lift. The white folks created this structure. We're not going to just step back now and say, okay, then we want to dismantle it, but you do the work of dismantling it. See, that's what we did when we built America. We want to build a great country, but we're going to bring in a lot of slaves to do it, and a lot of Asians too, to build the transcontinental railroad. And meanwhile, underneath that, we'll just be using women. That's the next big thing, misogynistic world. Okay. So I did that. But here's something else I did. I went on a kind of search for dismantling as opposed to destroying. We don't want to destroy structures and systemic racism. We want to dismantle them, because those things need to be repurposed and refamed to create a society of equity. You might look at the things that are going on with the police right now in this country. A lot of people want to defund the police, end the police, but a lot of people are saying, no, we're not saying that. We're saying we want equal protection under the law. We want the police to go into our neighborhoods like they go into every other neighborhood and do their job. So it's a very complex thing, and I need to do honor to that. Now I want to say that one of the things that I think is hard for white males and white women who want to do this and want to do it mindfully as opposed to mindlessly is to uh, have some kind of a compass, some kind of a guide to lead them through. And I want to share my screen with you, and I'm going to try to share something with you. This should be a really hilarious moment now, me and technology. Do you see that image?
Yes,
Everybody see
clear,
that image?
very
Tracy's
clear.
like, thumbs up, Barnaby, you did it. Um, and my there's the pictures of people, you don't see their faces on the, you can see the whole image. Okay,
Yes.
so this is a courageous conversations compass developed by Singleton and Linton, and the link is in the chat. This is, and now an organization. Singleton is a man, forget his last name, but he created a compass to use when you're having courageous conversations about race. And sometimes the conversation that you need to have about race is with yourself, with the board of directors in your head while you're practicing mindfulness. You know, you watch the TV, you see that there's been another racially motivated crime committed in front of our very eyes that we're all rushing to spin some kind of a story about. And it's a spectacle. So it's TV and it's infotainment. But when we get away and we sit on our cushion, or when we sit down to practice mindfulness, how are we going to come to terms with what we just saw and witnessed? So just having a conversation with ourselves, what's the moral way in which we respond in terms of what our beliefs are, you know, and how do we rationalize shutting off those voices, oppressing the moral voices in ourselves before we oppress anything outside of us? What about the heart, the feeling part, you know? And these are the racial issues that drive how we either react or respond to these issues. So if you read the chart, and again, the chart is will be accompanied with this recording and you can see it, but you could sit with this on any day in response to anything that happens and go, who am I being? Who do I want to be in terms of the way in which I'm responding to this just within the own country of my interior landscape? But here's another thing, goes even deeper. And this is a recent discovery. And this is why I didn't want to say I'm representing the New York City Department of Education. Not on this one. This is too massive and also too singular to say. And also, everything is changing. How can you say you represent any institution when all institutions have to go through massive transformations today? So it would, but the main thing is, who can I find? Who are my anchors? Who can inspire me? So I have a question for the group. Has anybody ever heard of Thaddeus Stevens? Raise your hand if you know, if you've ever heard of Thaddeus Stevens. This is very interesting. Thaddeus Stevens. Okay, Heidi, you get the A. Thaddeus Stevens, check this out, was a radical Republican. A Republican and a radical Republican. You could even say, you could even that who's a Republican we know today, who's also a radical Republican. You might even think of somebody specific who represents that. Thaddeus Stevens was a radical Republican in the time of Abraham Lincoln. He was from Pennsylvania. He was a congressman. I want you guys to look at this. Let me see if I can get away with this. Look at this uh, compass. Now, if I move my screen, does my screen move?
No, we keep seeing the compass. It's clear.
Okay, good. So just look at the compass. And as you're looking at the compass, listen to what this radical Republican was saying at the time of prior to the Civil War, during the Civil War, and after the Civil War. Here's one thing he said in Congress, in the House of Representatives, this white male. I can never acknowledge the right of slavery. I will bow down to no deity, however worshipped by professing Christians, however dignified by the name of the goddess of liberty, whose footstool is the crushed necks of the groaning millions, and who rejoices in the resounding of the tyrant's lash and the cries of his tortured victims. Said that May 4th, 1838. Crushed necks, still got 'em. Groaning millions, still got 'em. Tyrant's lash, the industrial prison complex, cries of his tortured victims. Another quote. There can be no fanatics in the cause of genuine liberty. This is an important one for me. No fanatics in the cause of genuine liberty. And I invite you just to look at the compass as you listen to this and see where you see the issues for yourself. Fanaticism is excessive zeal. There may be and have been fanatics in false religion, in the bloody religions of the heathen. There are fanatics in superstition, but there can be no fanatic, however warm their zeal, in the true religion, even although you sell your goods and bestow your money on the poor and go on and follow your master. There may, and every hour shows around me that this may be, that there are fanatics in the cause of false liberty. That infamous liberty which justifies human bondage. That liberty whose cornerstone is slavery. But there can be no fanaticism, however high the enthusiasm, in the cause of rational universal liberty, the liberty of the Declaration of Independence. Said that June 10th, 1850. Now, I want to bring this up because here's something you need to test. This is not a guilt trip. I'm not coming on here, Tovi, today to have to show everybody how guilty, or to signal out to people how guilty I feel, or maybe there's some guilt that you go through, or how shamed I feel, or how bad I feel as a white male. Nobody has time for that after a certain point. If, as a result of dismantling and confronting these issues in yourself, here's what you need to test. Do you begin to feel a sense of your own liberation from your own bondage? I, as a white male, nothing has convinced me more to stay on this path than this feeling that I have of a greater liberation for myself. It's not just the oppressed who need to get free from the situation. It's the oppressor as well.
Yes.
We are both equally in this bondage of self, and this bondage is also happening between our ears, the wheels that are shoved into our heads, the automaticity. Ellen Langer says 96% of the time, we're not even there to know that we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
We are falling into an easily controlled toxic masculinity, or toxic automaticity, and toxic masculinity. And this is something that mindfulness can help us stay with, because we want to run when we see this. We don't want to sit with this. Here's the next quote. What an opportunity is presented to this republic to vindicate her consistency and become immortal. The occasion is forced upon us, and the invitation presented to strike the chains from 4 million human beings and realize them as men, to extinguish slavery on this whole continent, to wipe out, as far as we are concerned, the most hateful and infernal blot that has ever disgraced the escutcheons of man, to write a page in the history of the world whose brightness shall eclipse all the records of heroes and of sages. January 22nd, 1862. Now, I'll tell you, as I practice mindfulness in that and look at that, I hear something powerful in that. There's still a chance to redeem ourselves, as particularly with reparations, and it's time to start talking about it. We can do this if we can spend trillions of dollars inventing powerful ways to blow each other up. We can invent powerful ways to take care of one another while we still can. Because whether we kill ourselves with guns or whether we do it with climate change, one thing is guaranteed: one day all of our bodies will be corpses. So how do we want to be?
Amen to
And
that.
and here's the thing: this is a white male saying these things, and I don't see any white males talking like this today. I don't even see Joe Biden talking like this today, or even whoever. And maybe all white males feel they have to shut up because what they shouldn't center themselves in this. But I don't think that's what Black folks are asking us to do.
No.
I'm going to read this last one. We're running out of time, I know. This is what they said at his funeral. He never flattered the people. He never attempted to deceive them. He never paltered with them in a double sense. He never courted and encouraged their errors. On the contrary, on all occasions, he attacked their sins. He assailed their prejudices. He outraged all their bigotries. And when they turned upon him and attacked him, he marched straight forward like Gulliver wading through the fleets of the Lilliputians, dragging his enemies after him into the great harbor of truth. That's what they said at his funeral. This is Thaddeus Stevens. We have schools named after him. He's been marginalized. It's almost like he's been wiped out of a lot of our consciousness of history. This is a white male that we can celebrate. We don't have to feel like we don't have anybody who we can look at. He was 2 decades ahead of Abraham Lincoln. Tommy Lee Jones plays a small, juicy role in him in the film Lincoln, but even you can see how Spielberg has a hard time seeing this man in the context of who and what he was truly doing at the time. Now, I'm an actor at the beginning. I've just been asked to create a one-man show about this guy. I'll be doing this on my own time, but it's time for white folks not only to dismantle, but don't act like you're just discovering this needs to happen as a white person. They're
Barnaby,
all, yeah, go
you
ahead.
didn't know I
Sorry.
was going to do this, so I wanted to share this. You talked about this one man show. I had to do this slide just for you.
Oh, wow. I didn't know you were going to do that. So this all came about because a producer got a hold of me and said, "You're going to do this role," and said, "Do you know you look like this guy?" And so I've spoken to the head of the historical society, and I've been speaking to, I tried to get a woman of color, a very great playwright, to write this, Kia Corthron. Would you write this play? And she said, "No, Barnaby, you write it, you know." And I guess what I want to say is that this is so deeply human at this point. Don't assume. There may be some people, and you got to pay attention. This needs to be led. This dismantling process does need to be led by the people of color. But the heavy lifting, my dear white brothers and my dear white sisters, is ours. So that's 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 how I use the mindfulness, and I sit with that to examine these things in myself and also in my home life. You know, am I taking out the trash? Am I doing the dishes? Or am I waiting for my wife to tell me to do something? Or am I noticing that things need to be done and doing it? It's all interdependent.
Isn't it though? Isn't it though? Yeah.
I know. I'm
Yeah.
sorry for talking too much,
No,
but
you haven't. I'm just sitting with the fact that you really took us to school on this and brought us all the way from racism to doing the dishes at home. I mean, it's literally. I mean, but I'm just naming. It's like it's that level of awareness. It's that foundational.
eh,
Well, let's open up the floor to some Q and
okay.
A.
All right.
So, if folks want to say something, ask something, please. What's resonating? What are you sitting with? What questions might you have of Barnaby? You can just unmute yourself or you can type up next in the chat. It's up to you.
Criticize, challenge, chastise, tell me I still owe you
I want to ask a
$200.
question.
Go ahead, Barbara.
What's the first step from the medicine chair to taking some action?
Well, for me, it's start where you are. Join a group that is coming together to encourage people how to do this. There are tons of organizations out there now that are organizing, and I told you about one of them, white people doing something, who are holding, and we're holding each other accountable. So it's not just talking about it, it's action. So and action that really comes from the core of your being. I'm creating a one-man show to tell a story through theater, film, and TV about Thaddeus Stevens, who most white people don't even know. So just putting that into the mind stream of the collective conscious, I know, is a powerful thing. So use the compass, use your own sense of truth to excavate what your next step can be. So there's that. There's joining groups, there's thinking about where you are and getting inspired. And then also listening to the people who are talking about this. The link to Courageous Conversations is out there, and I sent it to Tracy and Tovi. So that for me would be the next step. First, begin to dismantle and look for those structures of internalized, habitual pattern driven automaticity, white privilege that's between our own ears as white people, and start sitting with the compass and just breathing through that. Then seek out others who want to take action. Support Black businesses. I mean, get out of the way. Say that there needs to be a Black president of this organization. And when she becomes the president, tell her to go become something greater than anything she could have possibly imagined. Put yourself out on the line. You think that there's guys who like it when I talk like this in this country? I got a bunch of buddies who sometimes get really upset with me. Well, we're going to have to go through this tension together, man.
Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. I like what Kathy Flaminio said. I love who I am being as opposed to who I want to be. That's interesting because in some ways you're there, right? You love who you're being, and who you want to be. That's interesting, Kathy. Do you want to say some more about that?
You said that. I'm quoting you.
No, I said, I said, don't love who you're being. I said, oh, you're saying you love the quote, who am I being? As opposed to, okay, good.
But I love who am I being.
I thought you were saying that about yourself, and I was going to say
I love that too. But I love that quote. I don't know if that's your quote, because I do think just a lot, when you think about mindfulness and meditation, it's kind of sitting with that. That's a mind shift for me. Who am I being as opposed to who do I want to be?
Yeah.
Like, who am I being right now? And how am I interacting with material that's coming my way?
Yeah. Actually, Asia Davis and Molly Olapini are partners, and they are the organizers of White People Doing Something. Yeah. And I actually heard Asia say that, Asia Davis. And so that's who said that.
I love when I hear something and then I'm like, I got to figure out who said that, because I'm like a quote. When I hear these little things that could massively open up something bigger. So Asia Davis.
Yeah.
And thank you for I'll just say it out loud. I just really appreciate, I met you, 2 years ago, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to reconnect. But I really appreciate your authenticity and vulnerability and getting out here and saying what you're doing, and inspiring us, to take the next best step, which is a big step, is what's happening between the ears and the eyes. And then from there, being in choice, being in the next right action,
Yeah.
And
the
I do
next
have to
step.
endorse the course, Tovi and Sally Green. I mean, the course that you're doing is so incredible.
Yes.
I think it's a huge guide and a huge step. Huge, and it's been really life-changing.
Absolutely, Sally. And Sally, your partner, who you did those presentations with, Tovi, and then
And
there was
Grace.
And
and
Grace, yeah.
So,
Thank you, Kathy.
yeah, there's this work is emerging in accordance with its being all over the country. But again, Thaddeus Stevens, I'm pretty sure that we're not Russia, and Russia just disappears people and wipes them out of the history books, but we have our own way of doing something similar to that in our country. We do, man, because it was like nobody knew who Thaddeus Stevens is. The guy who started the Thaddeus Stevens Historical Society in Pennsylvania went to the city that Thaddeus was born in. Nobody knew who he was. They weren't doing anything about him. But a biography of him just came out by the historian Bruce Levine, and I'm telling you, man, it's gonna pop.
Beautiful.
Questions, observations.
Terry from Delaware.
Hi, Terry.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
I just
Terry.
want to say hello. I ran from a meeting, always, but had to be here. I've only met Barnaby one time and just connected, love your spirit, just love your awareness, and want to invite you to Delaware to do a virtual conference on October 8th. So I want to know how we can get you here, because this is exactly, I think, the connection. It connects policy, it connects heart. We always talk about doing professional learning that informs the mind but engages the heart, so that our hands are moved to compassionate action. And I felt that. And so I just thank you for, and Tovi, whenever I come to these, I just always feel like everybody is so real. And I'm just grateful, because it pushes me. Some of the things that you talk about, I'm a Black woman, and I haven't experienced at that level, and I really want to get there. And so I'm just grateful, and I thank you.
Oh, it's an honor. And I just have to shout out my brother from another mother, David Forbes. Dr. David Forbes is on here. There are people. David Forbes has been a very powerful critic of what's going on with mindfulness as it continues to emerge in a democratic or a society that is still aspiring to be democratic, even though it's incredibly threatened by authoritarian and fascist actions. But there are people, Ron Purser, David Forbes, everybody has something to offer. Nobody has nothing to offer. Listen to these critics. Listen to them. Their critiques are meant to be integrated, not to shut you down. And so the people who really bring up issues around the tricky aspects of mindfulness and how it can be co-opted.
Thanks, man. I have nothing critical to say about Barnaby. We love him here in Brooklyn, and this is great. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And
I appreciate, I appreciate you saying that. I think sometimes, and just a small snippet in our communities, when we come in and talk mindfulness, that everybody keeps talking about calming down. Oh, it's about quieting and calming down. And I just want to, it's just another way to oppress. So I think being really careful about that. We see it all the time.
yeah.
I was just in a class where I was observing, and an educator was like, the kids were doing what they're doing. You were paying attention, and she's like this. I'm like, oh, wow. Oh, so it's even, yeah.
I want to thank you, Tovi and Tracy, for allowing me to set some parameters around this. I can tell you that what my job is, and we said what my job is, but I'm not here to talk about any of that. But it's not like there isn't work going on in that area. So but there's a larger calling now.
Yes.
There are mindful cities, the Society for Mindfulness in Society. Look at what the Mindfulness Initiative is doing in England. It's introducing mindfulness to members of parliament. Well, you know, we have to have an ongoing discourse, discussion, and debate around what is this for and what is actually going on here with mindfulness. With, I believe, higher education. I'm getting a lot of calls now from higher education. They want to create departments for mindfulness because it's a critical thinking tool. It's a holistic tool. It's what we're going to need, especially Ellen Langer. You should take a look at Ellen Langer because it's it's almost learning how to notice and appreciate mindfulness when it's right there in front of our noses.
Well, Barnaby, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for bringing your voice into this space. Again, in this forum, in this fashion, we just deeply appreciate you. I know that Facebook is lit up right now with folks listening live too on the live stream. And you have just you always bring your full self, and we're just so appreciative of that.
Whether you like it or not,
Whether we like it or not, here you are.
You're gonna get
No,
the
we
full
love it.
roller
We don't
coaster
just
ride.
like it. We don't just like it. We love
I'm
it.
saying that to keep myself right sized, you know.
Okay. And so we just thank you for, I know this hour flew by for us all. On the screen, there are ways to support COSEM so we continue to spread the word. Our next equity conversation isn't until fall. We have lots of summer offerings, so check out the website. I want to just name for people that in only the few, like 2 to 2.5 years that we've been doing this, we've been empowering educators to integrate mindfulness at their schools since fall 2018. We've grown to over 4,500 newsletter subscribers, over 1,500 Facebook members, over almost 5,000 Twitter followers, over 16,000 LinkedIn connections. We are growing a movement of educating mindfully and what this means. So absolutely, folks, we need you on board. We need you spreading the word. We know that this is the future of humanity, to restore to what we were all born to be able to be and do, which is breathe and pay attention and be aware. And we know how to do it. We just need to reconnect to it. So thank you again for joining us.
Toby. Thank you. And thank you to Tracy Heilers, a parent who wanted to create something. And
That's right.
she's a parent. So we need to listen to our parents as in the world of public education. And that's the other thing about Thaddeus Stevens. He argued intensely for public education, and he also was one of the big advocates for the 14th Amendment, and he impeached Andrew Johnson, who is not unlike some of our more recent world leaders.
Well, we can't wait to see you in this one-man show. I have a funny feeling it's going to even make it to Broadway. I just feel it in my gut. So we're going to just be seeing it all over. And I'm just so excited for you, for that opportunity, and just for you to continue to live your passion. So thank you for blessing us. Thank you for this space. Thank you for your voice.
Gratitude.
All right.
Good
Take
luck,
care,
everybody.
everyone.
Take care.